All right, it's time for our final chapter of She Persisted, Claudette Colvin. Chapter 6, Who Wouldn't Cry? When Claudette pulled up in front of the juvenile courthouse with her father on the morning of March 18, 1955, she was confident that by noon her name would be cleared and soon she could go back to being a normal high school student. After all, her attorney was prepared and he had entered a plea of not guilty. Gray was hoping to use Claudette's case and the words she shouted to the arresting officers to showcase how the city and the state of Alabama's segregation laws were unconstitutional and, according to the rules of the government, illegal. Fred Gray and Claudette Colvin were not only putting the segregated bus laws on trial, they were putting Jim Crow, the racist system of segregation in place since the end of slavery, on trial. In the courtroom, community leaders Joanne Robinson and Reverend Ralph Abernathy sat behind Claudette and her attorney in the courtroom, while the student witnesses sat in the hall waiting to give their testimony. First, the arresting officers testified that Claudette had fought them by kicking and scratching. One falsely stated that Claudette had shouted that she was just as good as white. In Montgomery, that type of statement from a Black person was a dangerous one to make. The prosecution even produced a letter from a white passenger who praised the officers as gentlemen in the calm and gentle way they treated Claudette before her arrest. But the Black student witnesses offered completely different accounts of how Claudette was roughly handled and mistreated by the police officers on the bus. Gray himself called into question laws that discriminated against Montgomery's Black citizens. After Judge Hill heard from both the defense and the prosecution, he made his decision. Guilty, he declared, slamming down his gavel before lunchtime even began. Claudette was released into the custody of her parents and placed on probation indefinitely. She'd kept her feelings inside throughout the weeks of preparing for the trial, but now that she'd been branded a criminal with a record that would follow her like a shadow, the tears started and wouldn't stop. Who wouldn't cry after hearing a guilty verdict? The next day, residents of the capital city read the headline, Negro Girl Guilty of Violations of City Bus Segregation Law. The revolution that had been brewing finally bubbled over. Many Black people no longer wanted to ride the buses, choosing instead to walk or carpool with those who had cars. Some wanted a complete boycott to protest Claudette's verdict. Others wondered if a teenager, a poor girl from King Hill, should even be the face of the boycott movement. And after the leaders poked and probed, met and argued, their verdict was no. But they did agree to appeal Claudette's conviction and ask the judge to reverse his decision. This time, Fred Gray managed to convince Judge Eugene Carter to drop 2 of Claudette's 3 charges, but Claudette still had to remain on probation and pay a fine. After the trial, Claudette returned to the same high school in the same city, but not much else would ever be the same again for the residents of Montgomery. On December 1st, 1955, just 9 months after Claudette was found guilty of violating segregation laws, Rosa Parks, the NAACP youth coordinator who had befriended Claudette, also refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a crowded city bus and was arrested. Rosa Parks' arrest kicked off a bus boycott lasting 381 days. Black residents walked and carpooled to school, work, and church. To intimidate them and end the boycott, protesters were fired from jobs, received death threats, and were even bombed in their homes. Many were the victims of violence, but they vowed to keep walking until their demands for fairness were met. Fred Gray sued the state of Alabama in the groundbreaking Browder versus Gale case that challenged segregation laws, and Claudette Colvin, as one of the plaintiffs bringing the case to court, delivered a powerful account of what had happened. The testimony of Miss Colvin and the others reinforced the Constitution's position that you can't abridge the freedoms of the individual, cited one of the judges in the case. Claudette's testimony, along with 3 others, ultimately led to the desegregation of Montgomery city buses. Before she testified, she bowed her head in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. December 21st, 1956 was the first day of integrated bus service in Montgomery, Alabama. Black people could now sit anywhere on the bus they wanted, and it all began with one brave girl who asked questions about fairness and justice and found her answer on a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And that girl was Claudette Colvin. So, how can you persist? Do you have your own questions about justice and equality like Claudette? Well, here are some ways you can find answers. You can conduct research to learn how members in your family may have brought about change in their communities. You can read about others who are making a change in the world by using their voices to stand up for what is right. Know your rights. Visit your local library and ask for help in learning more about state and local laws. Read a copy of the Constitution. And talk to your friends and family about how they would like the world to change. The end. So I hope you enjoyed that story of young Claudette Colvin. We know the story of Rosa Parks. We hear that story a lot more, but Claudette's story happened a little while before Rosa Parks. So, all right. Well, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you later.